Well, hello, Catholic Match family. Damon Owens here. Excited to be with you and introducing a friend of Catholic Match and someone who's got lots of experience and wisdom as a coach and singles. But first and foremost, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us today for this edition of Live. I'm looking at the chat already, and it's already hot and popping. So between our guest Chad's wisdom and your questions, we're counting on a beautiful hour together to help grow and find that forever love, which is why we're all together, helping each other, working toward heaven, finding a partner and a relationship that really draws us toward the Lord. So with that, why don't we begin with a prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, we just ask you, as always, to be with us with your presence, your grace, and the fruit of that being the peace and the joy that we can't create on our own, that we can't pretend. But Lord, we know that not only when two or three are gathered, but when believers gather and celebrate and acknowledge who you are, that you not only make yourself known to us as a group, but individually, to our hearts, to our desires, to the needs, to our wants. And for that, Lord, we thank you. We thank you now. We thank you in advance that you bless our time together, honor our efforts, and purify all of this for your glory. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, hold on a second here. Chad, we do want to thank you for joining us. Let me just say hello to some of the folks that have come in. I see David May, Sheila, Maria Medina, Joanna Arnone, Regina Hall. Thank you guys for being with us from Taiwan. That's fantastic. Juan Gonzalo from Miami. Glad you're with us, Juan. And Nancy. Yeah, I can't wait either. It's going to be a good day. And I see your question there. I might have you to copy that in the question a little bit later, or if I can scroll back up because the comments are coming pretty fast here. Edward, Jeanette, thanks again for being with us. Melissa, Hazel, Diana, Natasha, Agatha, Denise, wonderful. Fantastic. Hey, if anybody's here from New York, I'll be up there tomorrow night for the Love and Responsibility Night, the young adult event there. So check your calendars if you're in the Manhattan area for that tomorrow night. But again, we welcome Susie and Susan and Cheryl, Loretta, David, Peggy, John, Stephanie, Aldani, wonderful, from Montreal, wonderful. And Carolyn, blazing hot in San Antonio. Is that because of you or is that because of the weather? I think it might be both. So great. Anyway, we're so glad you all have joined us today for our, again, my name is Damon Owens, and it's been a privilege. It is a privilege the last couple of years to be part of the contributor team at Catholic Match, to do a conversation and teaching. And as you know, my background is in the theology of the body. So all of that relational truth about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how we live that fullness. That's really the heart for the last 3 decades. Man, 3 decades of really joyful exploring and discovery about God's plan for us. So with that same wonder and fascination, I'd love to introduce you today to Chad Etzel. Chad is the host of Catholic Single and Flourishing podcast, 8th Day Coaching. He specializes in coaching singles in the single life, but also some great wisdom and what it's like living that in our world today. We hope today to plug you, but also to learn from you, Chad, a little bit about this drama, this challenge of living as single. So Chad, welcome to the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Damon. It's so awesome to be here.
Good stuff. Why don't we start a little bit about yourself? Tell folks about the work you do, what got you into this, and where's the heat? Where's the passion coming from, Chad?
Definitely. Well, I think a lot of this started with me being a missionary. I've been a missionary in some capacity for the last decade, and actually met you when I was a missionary for the Culture Project. So maybe some of our audience is familiar there. And I was at the Theology of the Body Institute for one of the courses. And so that's where we originally connected. And then eventually made my journey to Focus, and now with Focus, been with Focus in my 6th year now. And as I've gone along, I think one of the areas that I really found a niche in with coaching was actually fundraising. And because there's so much that you're training missionaries who are non-sales people to essentially do sales things. And I didn't really realize it until I started just coaching people through the process that I had an aptitude for this and I could do this. And then I realized there was this whole industry for coaching. And that was anything from personal life coaching to business coaching to mid-level manager, CEO coaching, and so on and so forth. So because of that, learning the industry, realizing, hey, there's ways to get more training in this, I decided to explore that mostly because I wanted to develop the tools and the missionary life on fundraising. But then also realized there's a lot more people doing some more entrepreneurial stuff. And so with Focus, I do full-time coaching and the leadership coaching, and then realized, hey, you know what? There's something here where I can apply this to coaching singles. So
Mm.
that's a little bit of my journey to getting to where I am
Yeah,
now
well, you
coaching
named some
singles.
fantastic apostolates here, folks who are really just, super active. For those not familiar, Focus is a fellowship of Catholic university students, and I'm not sure there are many larger, engaging events. Not mentioning
Yeah,
the number of missionaries that are on college campuses around the country. So it's definitely the heat, and you're meeting people who really want that. I guess can you say excellence? I mean,
yeah,
just that next
absolutely,
level of
absolutely.
performance.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's encouraging. So I'm sure you're familiar with our world here in Catholic Match, and more than just an app, more than just a dating site, and there really is a heart to develop community here as an essential element. And certainly the last couple of years, few years through COVID, really drew the essence of what it is to draw, even if you're not, swiping right, swiping left, but building community among believers. And the challenges, the frustrations of navigating not just dating in a post-COVID world, but dating with a Catholic purpose in mind. What comes to your mind and heart right off the bat in that whole world, given the people that you work with and the system that you're working through?
In terms of challenges and struggles, is that what you're asking?
That'd be a great place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's a number of different directions that this could go. And what I've noticed, and the reason that I ended up with working with singles and particularly young adults, is that there just hasn't really been a lot of content for this particular audience. And full disclosure, I'm a part of this audience too. I'm single myself. And so I know just from firsthand experience kind of what the messaging is. You mentioned the focus conferences, and I've seen you give several talks at the focus conferences, and it's incredible because you can have 17,000 people in a room, many of them college students, and very college specific talks. Well, what comes with that is oftentimes you have the chastity talks, theology of the body content, all this great content, and then that's about where it kind of stops. There's
Mm,
some relationship and dating stuff that's there, but then it kind of drops off until you get to engagement, and then you get to marriage and you have more stuff for there. But what I realized is that there's a void, especially for those of us late 20s into our 30s, where there's not a lot of content out there on how to navigate the Catholic single life. And in particular, what I do, I like to talk about living your vocation today, kind of more of the small v vocation of what is God calling me to today, but also paving a path for your long term permanent big V vocation.
mm,
Because I think there's the challenges on both sides. One which is, oh, I just got to pray about it and God will just deliver my spouse to my front door,
mm,
versus I just got to do it myself and forget God in this equation and I just got to pave my own path. But really there's that happy medium of, life doesn't begin when you get married. I
mm.
think that's a lot of our mindset, or can be our mindset. But I'm going to take ownership over my life today. I'm going to grow in virtue. I'm going to grow in my personal finances, which is often what I coach around, and
Mm,
really nail that today because it's going to pave a path for my vocation, my permanent vocation in the future.
mm. Do you see that there's major or substantive differences generationally? You mentioned sort of in the 20s preparing, which is a big segment of our community, but there's also older singles. There are those who have coming out of relationships, whether they're, annulled marriages or whether they're, long-term relationships. Do you see that
Yep.
either generationally or in those stages that there are important distinctions, or is it pretty much a mindset that is in, preparing for the possibility of marriage?
There's definitely huge differences, and In terms of the generational stuff, there's probably some trends. I haven't looked too much into the different generational differences, but certainly I really believe, just from a coaching lens, a lot of times what's happening is everybody's coming from their own specific place in their life, and they might have past relationship wounds or whatever it is, and that could come from a previous marriage, and then now they're divorced or annulled or something like that, or it's just it was a deep relationship that got, either went too far, or maybe was just unhealthy or something like that, or none at all.
Mhm.
And because of our past, that shapes where we are in the present. So I would say, I don't know in terms of like sweeping differences between the generations, but every person is going to have a different background or different way that they're showing up, which is
Mhm.
why I also think that coaching is very helpful, because it's very much introspective, asking a lot of questions as opposed to just, hey, here's what I think you should do, and just providing solutions right away.
Well, that's a really good point. Maybe that's actually something we should clarify. So,
Yep.
from a coach's perspective and one being coached, what are the sort of the scope and the boundary of coaching versus therapy or versus
Yeah.
community?
Great question. And I talk a little bit about, I mentioned some woundedness or trauma even, and what the realm of therapy, there's a lot of crossover between coaching and therapy, but specifically therapy is going to address the wounds and the trauma. It's all about healing. How do we help somebody heal? And I often talk about this as, it's like somebody has some sort of dysfunction in their life, and they're trying to move from dysfunctional to functional. Whereas
Mm,
coaching is more about, well, how do we move somebody from functional to optimal? So that's
mm,
how we're a little bit more goal oriented and goal focused as opposed to healing focused. And
okay.
what giving you a couple of examples here. Number one is finances. Well, I'm more likely to be able to coach somebody when it comes to finances and how to get on a trajectory, how to get out of debt, those sorts of things, as opposed to one of my counselor friends said to me, yeah, well, it's great to know that you're there doing that, because all I can talk to people about is helping them with, their attitude towards money, and maybe some
Mm,
past trauma that's happened with money. And how do I help them get over that? But you're actually able to give them a step-by-step process forward. And then another example that I would share in there is confidence. That's a very big topic, and I think a lot of singles want to grow in that particular area. And this is something where counseling and therapy, you may be working on this, and it may be related to some past trauma or some wound from childhood or young adulthood or something. But the coaching, when it comes to confidence, we're not really going to be digging too far into the past. We may
mm,
use the past as reference, but really it's about the situational. We will, if we recognize it's something chronic and needs to be in therapy, that's beyond our training, so we want to refer you to the therapist. But if it's something that's more situational, of I have trouble talking with the other sex, and these sorts of situations, that's something that we can coach more readily, because we're able to dig into the thoughts and the emotions that
mm.
come with those specific situations, to be able to coach people on how to take steps forward in the direction that they feel like God is calling them to go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and especially in that therapist, counselor end, there's usually something diagnosed, right? You're trying to
Yes.
get to a
Right.
certain diagnosis, and to on the coaching side, it's about optimizing and looking at, I guess, impediments or barriers through that. Do you need to coach to a system, or how does that work when you say, do you sort of accept people as they are and help them to move based on their measure of success, or do you approach with a certain system of
Yeah.
what that progress is?
So in general, what we're taught as coaches is to follow the lead of the client. That's really rule number one. And what that means is that you have to ask the client to be proactive in their own coaching. So it's, what is it that you want to talk about? What is the goal that you want to achieve? And specifically, what's the goal you want to achieve for this session? So it usually starts there. Sometimes if people are hiring me specifically for things like financial coaching, then I have an outline of, hey, these are the things that we can cover, or here's the steps towards creating a financial vision. So I'll bring in some of that stuff, but it's usually what is somebody going to bring in. And I think with when it comes to something like relationship coaching or singles coaching specifically, which is what I like to do, it's here's an assessment. We usually start with some sort of assessment where it's really measuring your attitude on your day in, day out behaviors, and then also measuring how do you respond to stress as well. And then
Mm,
from there, we can allow you to think about, hey, what is the area that I want to grow in with my emotions related to moving towards a relationship that could move in towards marriage. So those are it's very client led. So I think a couple of the skills that many coaches are trained in, and me in particular, it's empathizing, really hearing what is the person trying to say. There's that empathic listening of trying to connect and then I help my clients understand what they're experiencing in a deeper way. And
mm,
then my job is not to tell them what to do, but to simply ask questions for them to recognize what it is that what steps they want to take forward. And what
mm.
that does is instead of the ownership being on me telling them what to do, they take ownership over their own actions and over their own solutions.
Yeah,
And they're more likely to carry those action items forward. So really when it comes to coaching, it's all about establishing what is the goal, me listening to the client, and then and asking them good questions, and then setting an action item that is decided by whoever I'm working with.
that's very good. We've got a good group here today. Just reminding everyone who's watching to put your questions down in the question box, and we'll get to those probably sooner than later, given what Etzel is sharing about the gift of coaching. That it very much is a personal. It's very much guided by those of us who seek out coaches. So be sure to take even if you've got some of your questions. I'm seeing some of these in the comment box, which is fine. But if you put those in the question box, then I'll know exactly where to begin when we get to that section. So further on, welcoming folks. I see Caleb is here. Caleb, welcome. Glad you're with us. Corey, new to Catholic Match. Glad you're with us today. Anne, two Anns. Anne Swellentrop. Hope I said that right. Anne Morgan. Fantastic. And good. So maybe some more general, a couple of general topics before we get to some specific things from folks. What are you seeing, both maybe personally? That's got to be tough. I mean, you talk to a doctor who's like, specializing in something, and ask them about their health. It's a whole different sort of physician heal thyself. But you mentioned in the beginning that you're both single, living that life now, but you're also working with so many singles in navigating their particular life. What are some top line things that you're seeing consistently, either because of the culture or because of people that come to you? That maybe you can share a couple of some key thoughts that you've gleaned and learned through coaching singles.
Definitely. Well, I think one of the big things before I really launched the podcast was I interviewed some friends who were single, kind of in the same state. Early 30s was usually the group that I was speaking to, and multiple groups. But one of the things that actually surprised me was that the word pressure came up in every single conversation. And
Mm,
this is pressure that it's not like one uniform experience of pressure, but was coming from different places, whether it was the culture at large or the families and friends of, hey, when are you going to get your life together and find that special someone? So pressure
mm,
was one of those things that had come up, and being able to, I think, talk through that is one of the things that comes through coaching, of recognizing, you know what, I don't need to. A lot of this pressure that is, I feel like, is outside, is also in my thoughts as well. That
mm,
there's things that I'm telling myself about what somebody else is saying. There's a saying, it goes something like, you don't have to believe every thought you think. And these thoughts that come
mm,
from outside of us, from our family, from our friends, a lot of times get into our minds, and we believe them as the hardcore truth. Where what we do in coaching a lot of times is just ask, okay, somebody said that to you. Well, how true is that actually? And just by putting it out on the table, just by externally processing it, we can address things like pressure. And then I would also say another thing that has come up is the this, I guess, illusion of purpose. And what do I mean by that? I think a lot of times when we're single, we see married couples, we desire that, and rightfully so, we might feel called to marriage. But we assume that that's what our purpose is, and that's when life is going to begin when we get to that point, when we get married. And we don't live our life today. But in all reality, it's like you probably could speak into this a little bit, Damon. It's not
Mm.
when you get married, you just experience happily ever after. You have to navigate with your wife. How do we identify what God is calling my marriage to be about, our marriage to be about, so that we can be fruitful not just with biologically, but also spiritually as well.
Mm.
So that's another thing that I've run into is that a lot of people, a lot of singles, rightfully so, might desire marriage, but really what we're looking for right now is purpose and
Mm.
something that the God inspired purpose that God is calling us to today.
Mm. Yeah, that's really, really big. As you said that, I was thinking about, again, decades of marriage work and how much of it, and I don't know, it's almost a paradox, Chad, because, there is a certain preparation, right? A maturity, whether it's affective as a human being, as a man, as a woman, to prepare you for the vocation of marriage. And yet there's something about the vocation that matures you in a way that's you can't in alone.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but it's not like a bright line, like,
right.
"Oh, now I'm ready for marriage," or now that I married before I was ready. It's not a bright line because so much of what's is part of the natural growth within marriage builds on and adds to, the virtues, the temperament, the personality, the experiences, the conflict style, love language, all these categories that we've created, those are there, but it's not like, um, you don't work toward your sanctity, your fullness, your wholeness with or without, but it adds something, it adds a dimension. Maybe that's the right word. It adds a dimension that is not possible. So on one hand, if you do marry early, you can grow in these virtues in a way within marriage. If you don't marry early or later, you can continue to grow in your virtues as a human being. So it's almost a
That's
paradox,
right. That's
you
right.
know.
Well, and this goes to I think what I said earlier about how everybody's situation looks different, and that's why coaching and asking questions is much
Mm,
more stronger and impactful than just telling somebody a piece of advice, because you're getting to the deeper matter. So you're talking about, hey, people get married early, and there's a time of being able to grow together, and I think that's a real blessing. Is you get married in your 20s, early to mid 20s, you have a life to be able to build together. But
mhm,
for those of us who are in our early to mid 30s, we're further down line, and it would have been nice, to be have that had it our way, but God had a different plan, and through that, we need to recognize what are the opportunities here for
mm,
me growing in virtue or for me financially, and how do I become debt free? How do I learn to relate to my roommates, because I've been living with roommates ever since college, so over 10 years now. And yeah, what am I learning from those situations? I was just talking to a roommate of mine about this other roommate that we had who had just moved out, and was like, what do you feel like you learned from this? And he was a
mm,
very different person than both of us. But I think my roommate shared with me, the one who I was having this conversation with, is that it, these things, they just teach us how to love people who are so different than us. And
mm,
and I brought up the point that yes, to a certain extent we might choose our spouse, but we don't choose what the temperaments of our children are going to be like.
right.
We can shape them, and you can speak to this as a
Mhm,
father, but it's like the we learn so much from our just day-to-day relationships with our coworkers, with our roommates. And that's the school of love that we're growing as single people right now.
mm.
As opposed to a couple who got married in their early 20s, they have more of that time together to grow. But there's just a different opportunity for us as singles based on what God is calling us to today.
Yeah, and see that jives with the theology of, love and relationship. It jives with, the, even the I want to say the anthropology, what it just means to be a person, that all
Yes.
of our relationships teach us something about ourselves and the world.
Yep,
Everyone. And
exactly.
you hinted at sort of the mindset of whether these relationships are, what do I glean from them?
Mhm.
What is it? And not to be overly analytical, but to be aware, to be aware that every relationship changes us. Every good, bad, ugly boss, every neighbor, every, romantic relationship, every roommate, has reveals something about us, especially when they have the extreme emotions, like they really annoy us or they really delight
Yep,
us. And then it's like,
exactly.
wow, that was really,
Absolutely.
I miss him. Or I'm glad he's gone. I'm not going to miss, but there's something about every those that if we have sort of that wonder, that ease, the peace, the curiosity, every relationship does that. And as it should within marriage, right? The vocation of marriage, where you start to form each other in a very intentional and a very specific way.
Definitely, and that's something that I see just with singles, that every moment we need to take advantage of. Every moment is marriage prep. We
Mhm.
often think about marriage prep just in being engaged in going to the priest and getting that counsel to prepare, but every single moment is shaping who we are today, and that is putting us on track to be a person who God is calling us to be, the virtuous person.
Mhm.
And virtuous individuals make virtuous marriages and make virtuous families. So that's why today is the opportunity as singles to take advantage of growing.
Yeah, that's really it's kind of you helping me for tomorrow night too, when I go to New
Great.
York, talking about some of that. And without sort of a bait and switch, and I mean that, not a bait and switch,
Yeah.
that whole marriage prep is like when you reach a certain maturity, I'll start even like high school, right? And the marriage prep being more remote when you don't have someone that you're going to marry, you're in a certain, remote marriage preparation phase. When you find someone, you're in a more immediate one. Uh, and when you are specifically planning a wedding, you're in a very particular marriage preparation phase. Well, that bar keeps growing as we grow because, rightly understood as Catholics, marriage itself, the sacrament of marriage, is in a certain sense marriage prep
Yes.
because it's the
Yes.
preparation for the eternal marriage of Christ the bridegroom
Yeah.
and the church as the bride.
Wow.
And I don't want the single folks to think I'm just being, esoteric or just kind of this is exactly what we've taught for 30 years to help marriages flourish. That if you approach your marriage as a preparation for the supernatural marriage in, the book of Revelation, in what Paul speaks about in Ephesians, there's a whole different mindset in living marriage that is really powerful in exercising virtues you thought you had and ones you thought you'd never have. Forgive,
Absolutely.
mercy.
Absolutely. Yes, and that is so key, because if you study the theology of the body, if you study love and responsibility, men, women, and the mystery of love, which is Dr. Edward Sri's book, it's like
Book.
that gives you a vision for where you're going.
Mm,
Whereas we have competing visions with the Catholic vision of marriage and the cultural vision of marriage, which is the happily ever after Disney sort of vision, where you fall in love and everything's going to be great after that. But
mhm,
there really is, all right, well, what is marriage about? It's about self gift. And man can only find himself through sincere gift of self. John Paul II's one of his most favorite quoted lines from Vatican II. And that we are essentially saying we are most fulfilled when we're giving of ourselves to others,
mm,
versus the culture, which is saying marriage is about adults and their feelings. And you are fulfilled when you get what you want.
mm,
It's very different. But
mm,
having that vision of marriage is about self gift, pouring out myself, and that's how I become fulfilled.
mm.
That is the vision that can help us to grow in virtue, because it's, I may not want to do the dishes that were left here, my roommate went on his trip, but you know what, this is my call today, just to serve right now.
Mm. Yeah, you just reminded me of something I'd love to get your opinion on where, um, that what you just described, pivoting from, love as, something we experience to something that we give, that self-gift. That I still think that's dominant. I think it's dominant in a certain level of our
Yep.
maturity. But what else I've seen, uh, almost as challenging is this willingness to receive. love from another. What I mean by that is just, we can get so, especially as faithful Catholics, faithful Christians, there's almost and I say this with caution, there's almost an idolization. We idolize this suffering, long suffering self gift that I've got to totally empty myself and suffer in order for love to really count, right? And there's just enough truth in that you could go decades trying to just, and then it makes you resentful. It makes you
Hmm.
angry. It
Yep.
makes you, because you don't see other people doing it, and you have to constantly renew this 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 desire to give, what hurts. And I'm wondering, and I've seen some of this. I'm wondering if you've seen some of this as well. It's just as difficult to receive a gift from someone of themselves or something else. It can be very difficult to keep that what our friend Christopher calls that posture of receptivity, right?
Yeah. Right.
Uh, I'm wondering if you've seen some of that as well.
I think to a certain extent that sometimes we have a belief where I'm just not worthy of love. Maybe that's kind of not necessarily we articulate it, but we just might believe it. I've noticed that in some cases, maybe in terms of I'll just give you this analogy when we have missionaries who are fundraising and they just like, oh, my mission, I'm not worthy of receiving this gift. There
Mhm.
can be a lot of that, and it could be coming from a honest place where they just don't believe it. But then why did you sign up to be a missionary in the first place? Other times it can be a place of masking over some sort of other wound, and that where it's like, I'm not worthy to receive this gift, I'm not worthy to receive love, because to receive it might it might expose us to something else that's going on in our lives. So
Mm,
I think in terms of fundraising, it's you. Oh well, I guess this process works, so I actually have to do this as part of my job.
mm,
Or in our relationships of somebody who's they did something kind for us, and it's like, okay, yeah, thank you. Instead of really digging deep of that really made a difference for me. I
mm,
really appreciated that. We feel we feel deeper, and I think sometimes we're afraid to feel that.
mm, mm.
So I think that that's what may be happening sometimes is we put up the barrier because we don't really want to be exposed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we kind of cover it up because or even we believe that another lie, which is it's wrong to feel good about doing something nice for somebody or receiving something's wrong or
Mm,
receiving somebody's love, because I think another belief connected to that is suffering. I have to feel bad about suffering, and that makes me a virtuous person,
yeah, yeah.
which
Feel
which is
bad
actually
hurt. It has to hurt.
yeah, yeah. And I think what I would add into that is if you think about virtue, we talk about the spectrum of virtue when it comes to philosophy and human virtue of there's the virtuous person and there's the strong-willed person. The strong-willed person knows that they got to do something. They know what's good, but inside there's something that's holding them back,
Mm,
or they're wrestling with it. And I think that's a good place to be, as opposed to the weak-willed person who gives in maybe to some sort of vice or some sort of sin. But the virtuous person, actually, it's kind of ironic. The virtuous person, good things come easy to them because
mm.
they've exercised that muscle where the emotions of the desire actually drives them forward to
Yes.
do what is good.
Yeah. And if we don't have that mindset, we think something is wrong or that I'm getting weak because it's easy to give. It doesn't have that, it doesn't inflict that injury or that. And we've got phrases too that lie to us, like, um, it's better to give than to receive.
Mhm.
And if that's misinterpreted, right? Or,
Yeah. Yeah.
or God never gives you more than you can handle.
Mhm.
That's not in the Bible. Pretty sure there's more stories of God giving reminding you of how weak you are by doing that. So I think that we can misinterpret even some of the common phrases
That's right.
and think that that receptivity is somehow inferior to
Mhm.
even easy giving.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. We're with Chad Etzel, coach, single life, lots of wisdom. We've got some good questions we'll get to in just a moment. I see you, Samuel, and Cheryl. We'll get to your question. And but if you've got, let's see here, and and Anastasia, wonderful. So if you got your questions, go ahead and put those in there. We're going to pivot there in just a moment to pick through the great experience here of Chad. Why don't we do that now? Let's start with Samuel's question. Samuel's asking, can you speak to more of the struggles with online dating versus in person? We're all meeting here because of a shared experience, not just in real life, but from engaging with and seeking others online, specifically Catholic Match. Speaking for myself, I'm great in person, but tougher for others to engage with online, and they don't give me a chance to meet over video chat, for example. The same
Mhm.
is asking about the struggles of online dating versus in person. Any thoughts about that given the relationship challenges that you work with some of your clients?
Great question here. I just think about this. The online dating adds a different dynamic that we have to adjust and adapt to. And in particular, it's like I kind of compare it to people shopping in a way.
Mm,
I don't really like that idea overall because it gives this idea that we can go onto Amazon.com and order whatever, sort of piece of art that we want, and they have it stocked in a warehouse somewhere, and we can get it custom made or what have you. But in reality, there's a person on the other end of that, and it, it's kind of the, it's definitely a challenge because you have initially online there's that barrier of non-human interaction, and you have to capture somehow the person's attention for them to be able to want to respond. And then there's also the other dynamics that go with that is sometimes if somebody's on the free version they may not even see the message or
mhm.
be notified of the message. They may have shut that off or may have an older profile. So I think online it tends to be more of you have to you just roll with the punches and get the messages out there. Do your best to just try and see and not take it personally if somebody doesn't respond for whatever reason, because it could
Mhm.
be any of those that I mentioned. And then I think in person, there's the added element of you see the person there. And so it can be much more difficult when it comes to just like I guess, asking somebody out or showing that interest in terms of being asked out. There there comes with those human challenges as well, along with finding those events or finding those groups where you can be in a place where you're actively meeting other people as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think as much of a fan I am of Catholic Match, I think it's fantastic, and there's so many wonderful stories. It's just an incredible gift, and the technology in general,
Hmm.
able to do what we do. But I think a sober look says that, there is no silver bullet. There's no
Yep.
one way that's, clearly triumphant. But given our age, our time, given the technology that's available, what a gift that we
Yep.
have to add this as a dimension in the words that you have. For example, people have criticized in general the ability to, you mentioned Amazon, to basically search in a very selective way, characteristics and things to find people. But the truth is we do that in person too, right? There's
Yes.
people we pass by,
Hmm.
99% of people for someone what catches our eye, right? It could be physical characteristic, it could be, familiarity or something. So there's always some, cutting away, some self-selection that's there. And so I don't think that's a weighty criticism of it, but we do need to recognize it is different, and it can set in some of the mindset things that you just mentioned. The posture of meeting a real live person as opposed to a qualified checklist of characteristics that are carefully curated, and from that we should definitely find, our spouse. It just, love just doesn't always work that way.
Right.
Uh, and
Well,
and this
and I
Go ahead.
I think I would just ask Samuel here just to kind of think about what's the what do you think would it take to get two people to meet on Catholic Match and have a video chat?
Mm,
So that's just a question to pose and to think about for Samuel and the rest of the audience here, because I think if you're I think there's a lot of people who may have some biases where they just want to meet people who are in their area. They
mm,
may bring that in.
mm,
There's, as I mentioned, others where inactive accounts or free accounts or something. And by the time that you start answering that question of what it would take to actually get to, all right, here's the people who are active, here's the people who might actually be interested in me. What has to happen for me to have the video chat? Well, I may need a message back and forth a couple of times before even proposing that. I find it in my own experience that if and this isn't online dating is difficult because you have no context for the person.
mm,
But I've found it more likely to, if I know somebody from some sort of young adult event or something else, that she's much more likely to go on a date with me because we have that context
mm.
versus just talking on Catholic Match or having a video call on Catholic Match. That's no disrespect to the platform. Catholic Match does a great job connecting people, but it can take time in the connection, especially when you're just meeting somebody through a profile, can take time to ramp up there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point because some of the criticisms, we've heard has been you can almost interpret it that that context should be Catholic. It should be, and I'm not answering that it should or shouldn't be, but I'm hearing some of the critique, like, there are people who, and there's a comment here in the box here about how, people are on Catholic Match, but they private message in inappropriate ways, and there's no way they could be Catholic. And that was one of the, I should put a name on that, but just to be specific about it. But I think that also gets to your point that you can look at the Catholic being the context. You can look at, the self-selection to be on Catholic Match and have a profile free or otherwise as the context. And certainly the characteristics that you highlight about yourself and the ones that you are attracted to by others. It could, in a certain sense, it is a context, but to your point, it's a completely different context than if we were to meet face to face. Is that fair, what you're
Yeah,
saying?
I would say so. But I do want to say that I think the advantage of something like Catholic Match is you're intentionally coming to somewhere to meet somebody, whereas that may not be the case at a young adult event
True.
because people may be already in a relationship or just not looking, discerning religious life, those sorts of things. So I would add that into the fold too.
That's a great one. Great point. Easy question here from MT. Yes, this will be recorded and you'll be able to watch this later for sure. Um, just want to just throw this out here. Robin is asking, do you have any suggestions for those who are widowed?
Hmm.
Maybe we can brainstorm a little bit about how we
Sure.
might help Robin and those like that. Any thoughts on that, Chad?
That I guess that my first thing is I'd want to ask more questions on context, like
Mm,
how recent was it, and how is that impacting how you view relationships now? How is that impacting how you take steps forward in terms of meeting people and dating, if that's the direction that you want to go? And also other questions on, have you gone to counseling? Have you gone to therapy? Because death, especially somebody who has passed away,
mm,
is a very traumatic experience when especially when they're close to you.
mm,
So those are my initial questions, and going through that healing process. Then, if I'm coaching and a client has hired me because they've they've gone through the successful healing process, they've given it time, and they want to pursue finding somebody, it really asking, okay, why are you looking to find somebody now?
mm,
Because you also want to be aware of not going this direction because just because I feel like I need to have somebody in my life.
mhm.
I think, and that's stuff that also may be worked out in therapy. But those are some questions just to consider before diving full in. But Damon, what would you have to say in these
Yeah,
situations?
I agree with you 100% if we're asking those specific questions for people, but maybe we can play the sunny side up here with
Yeah.
with Robin not knowing her specific and say, she had a wonderful marriage, and her husband died. I'm sorry, Robin could be a man or a woman. Could Their spouse died, right? And they've gone through, the grieving as much as possible as time has, and they just want to be married again. Just let's say Robin wants to be married again, and now he or she finds themselves in this new world here, having already been through, let's call it a good marriage and a beautiful memory, and now into the dating scene. I wonder if there's any quick things we could offer Robin in terms of encouragement,
Hmm.
in terms of affirmation that you're on the right platform here with Catholic Match, and that your desires are good.
Yes. Well, I think with this, it's one of the things is, again, you have Catholics in this network on Catholic Match who are very much, well, having sharing similar experiences,
Mm.
potentially whether it's annulled or widowed. There's a community there, as
Mm.
you mentioned with Catholic Match. So one, a community to walk with, but also somebody who, if you end up in a relationship with somebody and then married to somebody who has a similar experience, there's an advantage there that I would point out.
Yeah, and I just found a similar or corollary question here
Hmm.
from Cheryl, asking similar later on through divorce. So again, between widowhood and divorce, sort of, um, maybe just some encouragement, some comment on, being in the right place and the patience. You're hearing there is a diversity in the community, I would say, based on age, generation, experience, etc. And I think the first thing is just to enter in very hopeful, and
Yep.
with a certain patience that says not everything will be for you, not everyone certainly will be for you, but prayerfully and hopefully, presenting yourself in a way that is authentic to what your desires are. You talked about your vision and what you want. I think that's very, very helpful. Setting expectations about what the platform can offer and offer you based on whatever clarity you have in your vision. Go ahead, Jen.
And yeah, I was just going to add in there that whatever the situation is, God wants to redeem it. God wants to speak to you where you are right now, and potentially if you bring somebody into your life, that's part of how he's redeeming your situation. And thinking about it's interesting how God weaves in and out the story of the gospel into our lives, that we're created for relationship and we're created for love, but sin interrupts that, whether it's something that was your sin or outside of your sin. Somebody divorced you and you were the unwilling party in this. The there's that original sin that is just part of the gospel, and but allows for the ultimate redemption of Jesus coming into the world and us being able to say yes to him and receive him. And God wants to speak the gospel into your own life. Maybe right now it's just kind of the desert wandering right now and you feel like that's where it is, but God is leading you forward to the promised land, to encounter the person of Jesus Christ in a deeper way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like that. And maybe just one last thought here is that I think there's real value in approaching all of these encounters on Catholic Match, and otherwise perhaps, but certainly on Catholic Match, approaching them as, establishing new friendships, doing those early stages of a real authentic friendship. And I say that in a way that is inviting to sort of temper and meter the idea that, of the vending machine, that we just put the right characteristics in, we find this person, then we get married and we have the relationship, right? And we may not even think that analytically, we think that's silly, but in our hearts, we're like, hey, I've done everything right. I should get the out result. And I think that the more human approach, even to the technology of online dating, is this great platform to build friendships because it has such a broader experience in friendship, right? Of different levels of friendship, that everyone you meet is a friend in the making, and the friendship may not go very far, after a conversation. The friendship may go on for a long time. The friendship may lead, to the special friendship of marriage. But there's something about, I think, bounding it in friendship that should keep the respect and the expectations in check. What do you think about that, Chad?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's as I mentioned before, we're created for a relationship. So even if you mentioned the special friendship of marriage, but outside of that, having that community, having people to be with, to have friends with, and to sacrifice for. It may not look exactly the same as the self gift of marriage, but being able to serve and sacrifice for those who might be our coworkers or those who we live with as roommates or anybody else that we're able to develop a strong relationship. Relationships are the most fulfilling thing in life,
Mhm.
especially when we get to that point of outpouring ourselves for the sake of the other person.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And oh, I see Anastasia is here. Anastasia Northup, good friend of Catholic Match and also head of the National Catholic Singles Conference. She has a relationship ready program she's telling us about. And their annual conference is coming up next month, August 25th to the 27th. I guess you get a National Catholic Singles Conference for that. I've loved speaking there. Anyway, her question for you, Chad, is what are the biggest obstacles you find that singles are encountering today as far as moving forward in their personal lives, both in general and their relationships? And then maybe what are some of your top actionable takeaways for what we can do?
I think one of the big themes that I brought up in my podcast that I want to use to address this question in terms of big obstacles is recognizing that we participate in our external circumstances, but our external circumstances don't determine the direction of our lives. So
Ooh, oh, say that one more time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can. No, it's our external circumstances. We participate in our external
Yeah.
circumstances, but they don't determine the direction of our lives.
Mm.
So we might have been born. So I was born in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, one of the most unchurched areas in the country.
Portlandia.
Yeah,
Yes.
Portlandia, that's right. And it's not as crazy as a TV show, but there's very few Christians, Catholics
Mm,
out there. There are some. There's a couple of good communities that I know
mhm.
of out there, but we can get stuck in this idea of, well, I was born here, I live here, and that's why I can't find somebody. Or maybe it's small town Midwest or whatever the deal is. Sometimes we can blame an external circumstance without taking ownership over, well, what do I do with that external circumstance? So I
Mm.
could decide, okay, to get on Catholic Match or try these other dating apps or something, or hire a singles coach, or I can move. And I know that there's a lot of implications and
Yeah,
personal life implications if
yeah.
you decide to move because job considerations and so on in your family and all that. But that's my whole point with our external circumstances don't determine where we go.
Mm.
We choose how do we cooperate with our external circumstances. So getting into what it was it Anastasia was saying is like the it's not when it comes to personal life, so going beyond dating and that sphere of things, I think that applies with our personal finances as well. It applies with the vision that we have for our life. Instead of it just, okay, I just take life as it comes and then hopefully one day God brings me my spouse. But it's what is that vision that I can begin to develop? And it's there what I'm going to be able to dream about this, allow God to speak into this dream. And what is it that I want to do? Travel and go climb Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever it is, and that I can work towards. Maybe there's somebody that I meet in that process, but more importantly, it's like, how is God directing my life rather than I just kind of live with what I've been given and I live on a day-to-day basis
Yeah.
without any greater vision or any greater goal. So I think that that's one of the, whether it's dating and relationships or anything else with the single life, the one of the big challenges there is it's just so open-ended that
Mhm.
we never really commit to a vision.
Mm.
Whereas marriage, it's much more, hey, here's your vocation, and your decision making has to do with the flourishing of your family.
Mhm.
So that becomes a little bit more focused and easier to chase after, as opposed to being a single person and just, all right, asking that question, what is God calling me to in a year from now or 3 years from now?
And is that something specifically there, that last point is what you would do with a single in coaching? Say, what is it that you
Yes.
want in this time frame, 90 days, a year, whatever it is?
Yes,
Is
yes.
that
So
actionable thing that you could
so
do?
a lot of what I do is I talk with people about what is the mission that God is calling you to, or what is the vision. And I've done this before where I created mission statements with somebody. Maybe it's not even a statement itself, but it's an actual like image that inspires somebody of this is the man or woman that I want to be.
Mm,
And then from there you start to calibrate what are those next steps. I think a second thing, I mentioned this over and over again about the finances, personal finances. Instead of just paying my minimum on my student loans, well, how do I get this trajectory from a year now, 3 years from now, where I paid off my student loans and I'm saving for a down payment on a home and I'm saving regularly for retirement? That's another thing that I would add in there of what I often coach a lot. And then another thing with that is actual dating strategy.
mm.
That it's there's the inner blocks, which are our thoughts and emotions. How do we resolve some of that tension? But then there's the practicals of how many people am I meeting on a regular basis? Because then that helps us move forward in terms of getting closer to meeting the person that God wants us to marry.
Good. And that jives with what you were saying earlier too about, the work that we do. And here's Anastasia offering the website for National Catholic Singles Conference, nationalcatholicsingles.com. It's next month. I've been many times to that fantastic event. Highly recommend for that as well. Let's see. We got a couple of minutes here. Let's see what else we can squeeze in here. Let's see here. Yes, 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 yes. Good for a good question here. All right, well, let's end here with Mark. Mark is asking, how do you know if you're ready to start dating? Context. I see your coaching mind going with all the follow-up
Yeah,
questions.
there's a lot of questions that I would want to ask. And actually, I want to ask about dating, what you mean by dating,
Mm,
because this is also something that I people have different impressions on what dating is. And that would be really the first question. What do you mean by dating? And then where does this question come from for
mm,
you? Because there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but the when it comes to dating, a lot of times, I'm going to get into this ambiguity with this word dating. A lot of times we think dating, we think relationships, which is oftentimes how we use it, especially in the Catholic world. Whereas there's also a stage before that when you're going on dates is kind of the way that it's expressed these days in the Catholic world, where you're not actually in a relationship like boyfriend girlfriend type of relationship, but you're getting to know somebody more in a context of friendship where you're not getting physical with somebody and so on. That I think is those two stages really need to be distinguished, because it's not you ask somebody out on a first date and you're in a relationship. That's that part I think really has to be distinguished. I'd say that the relationship one, there's more stakes to it. So there would
mm.
be need to be more preparation for that, as opposed to I'm interested in getting to know this person and would like to have a video call via CatholicMatch with them, or I'd like to have a yeah, just go grab coffee if I'm in person with somebody. That's something where the yeah, you make those distinctions. That's less. There's less of a sort of I guess barrier for entry
Mm,
to get going to be able to just get to know somebody over a cup of coffee.
mm,
The I think the ready part is just when it comes to first dates or the first couple of dates, they don't overthink it, because if you're if you're overthinking it and thinking, "Hey, I got to jump into a relationship right away," that's too much pressure to put on yourself, to put on whoever you're going on a date with. That will ultimately undermine whether you ask this person out or not.
mhm,
So what would you what's going on with you, Damon? What are you
Yeah, no,
thinking?
I like your distinction. I think I would start there also, defining our terms, right? And I like that first one of distinguishing between relationship and dating, right? Because there is a reality that, as many as we see are dating specifically for the purpose to find a spouse to marry, and that's beautiful. No
Mhm.
judgment whatsoever. That's your posture, that's your vision. There are also those who are dating because they just enjoy other people's company. And
Yes.
then so there's as long as we're upfront about that, as long as we're open about that, um, dating is exactly what I heard you say, that it is this encounter with another person at any level that lets you get to know them, and
Mhm.
without the pressure of either physical or relationship or others. When you first start dating, it's all the open-ended questions. It's, where are you from? Tell me about yourself. What do you like to do? Hey, do you know this person? What kind of music do you like? I mean, and there's a delight in that, and I think as long as there's an authenticity and an openness that this is, I enjoy meeting you, I enjoy meeting people, and you don't have sort of a false expectation or a false flag there, I think that's perfectly legitimate. I would imagine, if not just assume, that Mark is, you're on Catholic Match, so there's something about meeting someone, you have some definition, spoken or unspoken, about what dating and relationships are. So I think we can take his question as being, more relational, like
Mhm.
ready to start dating in the sense of, sitting flesh to flesh across from someone, or entering into relationship with another. And for that, I think, we would need a lot more time, but we would at least describe it as stages. And you did that, right? So being ready to date really is that opening, making yourself available, getting a profile on Catholic Match, getting on a Catholic Match live conversation, and starting to ask questions. These are all the preparatory heart things that set you up for that next level, and to decide at each level, is this where you want to go? Does this where you want? And if not, being honest and saying no, and moving on. But yeah, I think it's a lot of particular
That
questions there.
that's right. And just to tie a little bow on this, I think a lot of times there can be, I mentioned overthinking, but dating, we hear a lot of times in the Catholic world, dating is about marriage. And I think really dating relationships should be oriented towards moving towards marriage. But if you think about it, that's a lot of pressure to put on a first date. If you go into that mentality of, is this person the person that I'm going to marry? Because the truth of the matter is that for a relationship to eventually turn into marriage, it has to take organic steps
Mhm.
along the way to get there. So that's why I approach it as, first couple of dates, you're really just trying to get to know somebody as a friend and ask that question, hey, do I just want to have a second date? Not, am I going to marry this person, but do I want to have a second date? Do I want to have a third date? And just taking it step by step is a very helpful mentality to
Yeah,
approach.
you got me there here at the last minute
Mhm.
here, 'cause Melanie and I, my wife and I, I should have mentioned, folks who don't know, we have 7 daughters, and my youngest is a son, but, we have approached that for their years, that dating is for the purpose of marriage. But what we meant by that was not everyone you date, you're moving toward marriage. That would be
Yeah,
ridiculous, right?
yeah,
It's meant that there's a seriousness to opening yourself as a woman in any level to another, to a man, and whether it's revealing your desires and your dreams, or your hopes, or your heart, there's a seriousness to it that shouldn't be debilitating, but there's a seriousness to it that ought to always be there, so we don't casually move through, or hurt each other in those ways. I think that's what we meant by saying the connection between dating and marriage. But I'm gonna have to rethink that, because I can see how that could be received as the heavy.
yeah. Well, and it can put that pressure, especially on the first date.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to those situations where I've asked a woman out and she's just completely shocked,
Mm,
and like as if I asked her to marry me.
right.
Which is not what I mean. I mean, I do wanna move towards marriage one day, and that's an intent of mine, but it's really about, no, I just wanna get to know you better. And then it's very easy, it's understandable how sometimes men and women sink into, well, I just wanna hang out, I don't really wanna carry this intentionality because there's such weight that comes with the word date, because
Mhm,
we've associated it so much with the word marriage.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's almost like this the sling from the previous
Yeah.
relationship, previous experience, we kinda swing toward the other way.
Mhm.
Well, I knew it's gonna be a fast hour, chat, Etzel. Thanks so much for being with us. Why don't you share how people can reach you to learn more about, your coaching offering and your wisdom here with folks I'm sure or wanna connect with you after our talk today?
Definitely. Well, I have my podcast, which I'm going to be launching a new season tomorrow. And so feel free to check that out. It is Catholic Single and Flourishing. You can find that on most podcast platforms. And with that, yeah, I'm also rolling out some newer programs on my website. You can find CSF, that's Catholic Single and Flourishing, csfcoaching.com. It'll or Catholic Single and Flourishing.com will also take you there as well. And there's a couple of different ways you can, if you want to go with the full program, you can schedule a discovery call with me to discuss your situation. And I have a signature coaching program where I talked about vision and vision for your life as a single person, financial coaching as well. And then thirdly, with that is like the dating strategy, how to be a highly effective single and highly effective dater in the process. So I have
Wonderful.
those, which is like my signature coaching program. If you just want to have a 90-minute strategy session, you get that assessment that I mentioned earlier about how do you show up, and we talk and we just do some strategy with you. So that's a lower price point for that. And then other than that, feel free to look me up on social media as well. It's under my name, Chad underscore Etzel for things like Instagram and Twitter. And then also for LinkedIn, it's Chad dash Etzel. So those are the ways to connect with me.
Very good, very good. And again, as you folks know, this is recorded, so you'll have a chance to go back and listen to more of our conversation. But Chad, thank you so much for your time and joining us here in Catholic Match. Again, my name is Damon Owens, and I'm just delighted that all of you were so lively in the chat and your questions for our hour. I look forward to being with you again next month. In the meantime, make sure you're signed up to our Instagram and to our YouTube channel for lots and lots of content that we offer through that. And for our live that we'll have again next month. Keep a lookout for all those happening there. Thanks so much for being with us. God bless you.